Excellent. If the AI introduction looks like this, then obviously, the future of technology is really bright. I never imagined a foreigner giving my introduction in a setup like this. All right, so let's get into my presentation. By the way, first of all, I'm really honored to be in front of a very, very knowledgeable crowd. And by the way, I'm not a technical person. So I'm a business person as I wear a tie. And I will be coming from a standpoint where I will be talking about how larger macroeconomic, circumstances can be leveraged by the Indian industry and especially the pharma industry to our own advantage. So let's drive straight into the presentation. Unfortunately, there are no animations, so all right. So let's just talk about. And the question I'm going to ask here is that in a conference like this, I'm asking a question: should quality be of strategic priority for Indian pharma industry, right? And obviously the answer is no-brainer. But I want to come from a different standpoint. And I want to come from a standpoint of the current, the maverick discussions which are happening with the new US president. And he's talking about putting tariffs on almost everything. And he's also pushing, in his own way, for a free trade agreement with the whole world, right? Now, free trade agreement would have its own pros and cons, right? Pros in a way that it gives us bigger access to the market, and cons in the form of that US companies would also be able to come into India and sell their products, right? Does that pose a threat to the Indian industry? The answer is a big no. And here's some data to back it up. So we must all be proud that India has got the most number of FDA approved sites outside of US, right? That's number one. And number two is that Indian companies as a whole outperform rest of the globe in terms of the quality performance. In fact, as per the US FDA data, the Indian OAI is about 13%, whereas rest of the world is at about 15%, right? So that gives us definitely a huge advantage in terms of competing with the best in terms of quality, right? Now, keeping all factors aside, which is quality, products, etc., we still have a huge cost advantage, and that's my point here. That whether it's tariff, no tariff, FTA, no FTA, Indian pharma industry is in a very, very safe hands, right? But obviously, some potholes still remain, and let me just highlight it one by one. The biggest, I should say, shortcoming of the Indian pharma industry right now is the lack of, or rather the slow pace of innovation in terms of new drug discovery, right? You can see some statistics here. US and Europe still lead the new drug discovery domain, and India contributing just 2 to 3% of that share, right? Now the good news is that right now, new drug discovery is growing at a rate of about 15% CAGR, which is a very high growth rate, right? And then there are some concerns which remain in form of some quality and compliance, standards meeting, right? And that's where, I've just put in some clips from various print as well as web media, where they talk about how sometimes Indian companies had been caught and rather identified for poor quality. And one of the most infamous incident was the syrup incident, which actually pointed to the fact that the contaminants were there in the syrup. Although the recipes were all good, the manufacturing facilities were all GMP facilities, but there were contaminants while the material was coming from the suppliers, right? Moving on, so let's look at a very high level. And this is the data from FDA. So FDA speaks about what are the contributing factors towards most of the non-compliances which we see from this industry. And if I just add the first two columns here, the first column is actually inadequate documentation, and the second column is lack of internal controls. One thing which this report is silent on is the factor of the supplier quality, right? Now, obviously, when FDA kind of does an audit, it doesn't really go to the tier 2, tier 3 level of suppliers, but they expect you to be taking care of the quality standards coming from your suppliers, right? So keeping this in mind, doesn't move. Oh, okay. Can I go back? All right. Fine. There was a lag. All right. Now, we understand that yes, there are opportunities, there are challenges, but why are those challenges coming, right? In all earnest, as true professionals, we all work hard to meet our goals. And I'm pretty sure that everyone in this room would have the goal of making sure that the product quality which they are delivering to their customers is world class, right? But still, there are gaps which exist, which kind of ensure that sometimes, quality problems do fall through the gaps, right? And let's look at some of the major challenges why managing quality and compliance across the organization is so difficult. And the number one reason is siloed and people-dependent processes. Now, I'm pretty sure that in the past 10 to 15 years, there has been a lot of improvement which has happened in terms of adoption of technology. Unfortunately, in many companies, technology is still being used as paper on glass, right? The processes still remain paper-based, but on glass, which is basically on a tablet or a computer screen, right? So there is a need to re-engineer the business processes in a way that the processes are digital native, right? That's number one problem which I would like to highlight here. And this kind of cuts across the whole value chain, right from supply chain to even your customer complaint management. Second is lack of issue resolution leading to repeated complaints, right? And how many times you have seen that the problems are recurring in nature? And why is that happening? Because one plant doesn't know that a similar problem happened in another plant, and there was no horizontal deployment of the corrective actions in the other plants, right? So that kind of leads to repeated complaints coming in from different facilities of the same organization. I already highlighted the point related to supplier quality. Right? Now, supplier quality, in most cases, is completely managed on paper. Most of the audits which are conducted by companies for their own suppliers, the findings of those audits are not really integrated in your digital system. And that also creates a gap where you're not able to trace back the problem to a particular, finding which was found in a particular supplier. And then disconnected systems, you all understand that ineffective way of audit preparation, all that contributes to the problem. Now, just to give you a visual representation of how complex the problem could be, and primarily I don't want you to read this slide, you just want to look at the complexity. And this is a flow chart which was given to me by my technical team. It kind of drew a whole 40,000 feet map of how the quality processes are intertwined across the value chain, right from new product development to manufacturing, supply chain, customer complaint, etc., everything. And on top of that, there are unique quality and compliance requirements in the life sciences segment. I think speakers before me have already spoken about it, so there's no need for me to repeat all that stuff, but you understand the complexity, especially if you are exporting to Europe, America, as well as selling to India. You're basically following multiple standards across all the geographies, different geographies, and that itself creates a big problem. On top of that, FDA as well as ISO have been saying that we now start to move towards risk-based management of quality systems, right? And then of course, there's a whole lot of compliance requirement on documents and knowledge management, etc. All right, so let me just come back to the main topic of my discussion, that how can the next generation of QMS platforms like us can really help the pharma industry, right? So I've kind of laid the problem statement for you. Now let me just also share what's our view on solving this problem. The first thing is that the next generation platform needs to be extremely fast. Now we live in a day and an era where everything, right from if you have to order something, go to Zepto or say whatever, just click, automatically things comes in a click of a button. The lag time is so small. Now my friends in this room would agree to this fact that many legacy systems, especially the ones which were deployed 10 years ago, you click on something, it takes a few minutes to fetch you the data, right? Now that's happening because those were built on a very different architecture, very different thought processes, and the databases sizes have grown so huge in the past 10 years. Thus, a simple query from SQL takes about a minute or so, right? Gone are the days. Today's engineers are not going to accept that kind of status. So usability becomes the number one driver for the next generation of QMS systems. Number two is flexibility. The system should be able to work across the value chain of the organization, right from manufacturing, supply chain, your customer-facing organizations, everyone. They should be able to use one common system across the organization. The third aspect is visibility. I think the speaker before me spoke about the need for AI and ML in the whole scheme of things of pharma quality management. I just want to add one more thing here, which is on data analytics. Right? Now, data analytics is such an important thing. I think someone has said that your decisions are as good as your inputs. If you're not able to see the inputs, then how are you going to make a decision? So visibility of data is also very important, other than the need for AI and ML into this domain. Scalability of the systems. Yes, today we are going to talk about users, not in hundreds, but in thousands. Right? Because we are talking about one system across the organization, all users using the same system. So scalability needs to be of paramount importance. Alright, so quickly, how can ETQ help at a strategic level? It can help you maintain compliance with FDA, EMA, ICH, CDSCO, GMP, etc. Which means, as I said, I pointed to this fact earlier as well, the compliance should be built into the process, not bolted on, right? And then of course, you can help you automate your quality processes across the value chain, collaborate with your suppliers, etc. And here are some of the values which the next gen quality management system can deliver to you, right? Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to talk about each of the value drivers, but it is self-explanatory that deploying a cloud-based system has got its own advantage. I think some of that I've already spoken. Now, last 1 minute, let me just talk about some success stories in this area where people have adopted cloud-based technology and the scale at which they have adopted. Johnson & Johnson is one of the very successful stories which we have. They have about 50 sites using one single platform, all on cloud, collaborating with their suppliers and thousands of suppliers. So the total number of user count at Johnson & Johnson is close to 10,000. Right? So, plus they use advanced analytics. This is one of the comments came from their senior managers. Advanced analytics is the basis of next revolution, data democratization, giving access to our end users and letting them define what they need. Next is Organon. Now, Organon was a spin-off from Merck, right? Now, Merck, by the way, is on a legacy quality management system. So when Organon was getting spun off from Merck, they had an opportunity to create a quality system right from the scratch. and they actually chose the next generation QMS platform on cloud, which is ETQ, where they were able to kind of put all their quality management data and were also able to kind of collaborate with the suppliers. And the last success story which I have is again from Merck. Now, after the success of Organon, Merck themselves realized that their legacy system needs to be kind of upgraded, right? But unfortunately, you also know that it's very hard to move away from the legacy system in just one go. So they started with the area which was not covered in their previous system, which was supplier quality. So today, Merck has brought all their suppliers on one single platform to collaborate with them on all quality processes related to their compliance and quality requirements. All right, with this, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chaudhary. I would like to invite Gurneet on stage to present the token of appreciation.